Welcome to another edition of Fourth and Justus. I am Leonard Moore, along with Kevin Anderson and Luke Fetlem. And quite frankly, this is going to be the college football show. The last week was probably the most memorable week in college football, considering the activity that took place on the field with rivalry week and then all the coaching changes that have gone on since this past Saturday. Kevin, Luke, good morning.
Let's go.
Good morning.
Let's go.
I don't know about you all, but it's been an exciting 4 or 5 days for us, those of us who follow college football. And again, welcome to Fourth and Justus, the dopest show that provides a fresh perspective on the intersection of race, sports, and politics. Before we get to the politics and the economics of college football, Luke, I'm going to come to you first. Our Buckeyes got taken to the woodshed by the school up north. Your perspective, Luke.
Listen, that team up north, they put a whooping on the Ohio State Buckeyes. You got to give credit where credit is due. And you could tell it's been a long time coming, right? It's been, I don't know what it was prior to that, 3,000 days or something, right? Since Michigan had beaten Ohio State. So it was primed, right? It was all primed. Now Kevin's giggling over there because he thinks I'm making excuses. But I'm telling you, this was primed for the Michigan, Wolverines to beat the Buckeyes. It was in Michigan. It was snowing. It was cold. They had clearly planned and prepped. And the Buckeyes were coming off a blowout win over Michigan State. And I tell you what, in watching the game, it just didn't seem like they ever showed up. So credit where credit is due.
Kevin Anderson, what was your take on the game?
So first of all, y'all telling me that it's not cold in Ohio. Is that what you're telling me? It doesn't snow there? And then you're saying it was a long time coming. It was almost like you gave him a Christmas gift. But, I'm very happy for my boy, Ward Manuel, the AD at Michigan, getting that win. But I want to commend Coach Harbaugh for something. So I believe he's getting $400,000 to $500,000 in bonuses for winning the game. And what he's doing is he's turning it over to the athletic department for all those who were furloughed or had to take a pay cut during the COVID. So, hats off to him. They're a very strong, solid team. They can compete with, I think, those teams down south because of how they control the ball and they could run it and everything else. So, I think that they could go a long way in the playoff.
So how do you respond?
Or Kevin, they could also lose to Iowa in the Big Ten championship too. I don't know that Michigan is definitely necessarily that dominant team.
No, right. There's no way they're going to lose to Iowa.
That'll be the most Michigan thing ever. But I'm saying you have to expect a letdown this Saturday in Indianapolis. So Luke, I agree with you because I think they've been focusing on Ohio State for the last 2 or 3 years, and to beat them convincingly when those students. So I left the game with 2 minutes left, Luke, because I didn't want to see them rush the field. Me and my nephew said, man, let's go to the car. And plus I was cold as hell. But I think Luke is right, Kevin. You got to expect a letdown this week because Harbaugh has solidified his career at Michigan. Ward Manuel has been now, affirmed for basically giving Harbaugh the extension. And so, Kevin, you don't think it's natural to expect a letdown this week in Indianapolis?
No, because their goal is to win the national championship.
No, their goal is to beat Ohio
State. Win the national championship. The win at Ohio State just motivates them more to move on because they want to share just what you're doing. You guys have been national champions. They want to be national champions. So it's short-sighted to see that if they don't want to continue on, and I think he's the kind of coach, he's going to motivate them to go on further. But, one thing I'll say about the two of you, you are loyal fans. I would want you on my team.
Hey, Luke, let me ask you this. How do you respond to people when they say that it is good for the Big Ten and it is good for college football when the Wolverines are a top 10 team?
The Wolverines have a solid brand. I think the Michigan brand is solid. Now, it's been solidly on the basketball side. I think, because one thing that I took note of, I was supposed to go up to the game, decided I had to be a responsible adult and get some things done. So I stayed here, but watching it on TV, one of the things that I saw that was really impactful at the end, everybody rushed the field. I know, Doc, you'd already left, so you may not have seen this, but the cameras showed Juwan Howard embracing, right, Coach Harbaugh. And I thought that was really interesting because the brand of Juwan Howard is strong. And the brand of Harbaugh hasn't necessarily been strong. Now, credit where credit is due. He won the game, and he should get that. But I thought it was really interesting, and it was great to see, Juwan Howard kind of, embracing Harbaugh, congratulating him, like bigging him up and everything, because that I think goes a long way for Harbaugh in terms of kind of his celebrity impact as well.
And I know Harbaugh has his issues, Kevin, but I've been a Harbaugh fan ever since he took those brothers to South Africa. I think 2018 and 2019. I think he took them to Italy or something like that. And they weren't going there to practice. I mean, he was taking them there as sort of a cultural trip. So, Kevin, what is the internal critique of Harbaugh? Is he tough to work for? Is he just kind of what is his management style, and why does he rub people the wrong way?
Well, he's a different dude. I mean, he's wound a different way. I could tell a story that, and this is secondhand, but I heard that he was having a team meeting when he was with the 49ers. And the owner of the team came in the locker room while he was having this meeting, and he told the owner to get out because this meeting was for men. So, I think that tells you a lot about him. And if it's true, which I could think it is true, that, he marches to his own beat and, he does his own thing.
Right. What does this do for Ward Manuel, Luke, and then Kevin? I know you know him well, Kevin. Luke, what does it do for Ward Manuel? Black AD ran into some heat with some comments about when Chris Webber said that, Ward Manuel apologized to me about how Michigan has treated me. He took some heat for that. What does this do for Ward, in your opinion, Luke?
Yeah, I think it's big. Now, I don't know Ward like Kevin does. Met him a few times, had some conversations with him. But I'll say I think this is big for him because he was under pressure. Right? You got to beat Ohio State. You don't have a rivalry if you don't win games. So ultimately, he they restructured Harbaugh's contract. Right? He could have let him go last year, but they restructured it, made it laden with incentives. So incentives to win and win the Big Ten, when they're all the division and all that kind of stuff. So I think it makes him look very good, right? That he stuck with him, but he made it in a way. He did something that a lot of schools aren't doing right now. Right, which is saying we're going to stick with somebody instead of necessarily falling to the pressures of boosters, of donors, of other folks, right, and other people paying a buyout, right, to say we're going to restructure this contract in a way that makes sense for the school and it makes sense for Harbaugh. And I think to Kevin's point, the fact that Coach Harbaugh is going to be sharing his kind of bonus money to give back to the athletic departments, does speak volumes for him. But I think for Ward Manuel, this is a huge win and a great feather in his cap on his leadership style in believing in his coach, but doing something that's fiscally responsible for the university.
Kevin, can Ward Manuel exhale a bit now?
I don't think this has ever impacted Ward. Ward is a leader. He hasn't let a lot of people's comments and, thinking of one way or the other that dictate his thoughts. The other thing is that, to Luke's point, Ward was the first one to come and redo a contract and make it sensible for everybody. What I do think this shows, though, is that Ward is probably one of the best and leading ADs in the country. And, he doesn't get recognized for that. And, a lot of times, black folks just, are on the cutting edge, but they don't get recognized for doing this. And then when somebody else comes in and does what they do, then, they get all the recognition. But, Ward is, in my eyes, he's one of the best ADs, not only now, but that has ever been in the position.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Now, going on to a rivalry that is nowhere near the game. I believe Ohio State and Michigan is the best rivalry in sports. I just believe that. But down in Alabama, Alabama and Auburn played. Auburn is up 10-0 going into the fourth quarter. And Luke, they have been bringing pressure all game. Why in the last 3 to 4 minutes of the game did they go to a pseudo prevent defense, which ultimately ended up costing them the game in overtime? Luke, help me understand the logic of a defensive coordinator changing their strategy in the last 2 or 3 minutes of the game.
I wish I could. I can't. I don't know. I don't have an answer for you, Doc. I mean, ultimately, it was like they were playing not to lose as opposed to playing to win. right? And I think that there's this pressure that comes up, hey, we're up 10 going into the fourth on, arguably one of, the top teams in the country. And it was devastating to see because I think that's what makes college sports and just sports in general so much fun to watch is the opportunity and the possibility of upsets. And if you think about this, Ohio State going down that weekend, and if Alabama would have gone down too, just the craziness that would have brought to the college football playoff rankings and everything. I mean, wow, we'd have even more to talk about. But they played not to lose. And when that happens, I just feel all too often, good things just don't come of it.
Right. Kevin, is the Alabama dynasty slipping away?
I don't believe so. And I mean, if you look at the recruiting class, but I do want to mention one thing that, we talked about Ward and how this has elevated him. Well, I'll tell you who's on the hot seat. It's another brother, Alan Green at Auburn. Bringing in this new coach, firing Gus Malzahn, and then the way they lost. And, you can't put this on the defensive coordinator because the coach is on the headset and he's dictating what they're playing. But, the thing that I think Auburn was afraid of is that with all those wide receivers that Alabama has, they didn't want anybody to get behind them. So they played that soft prevent defense and they kept everything in front of them. And you knew Alabama was going to march down the field on them.
Right.
When they got the ball and they had some time left, you knew they were going to go down and tie the score. You just felt it. And if you looked at the TV and the fans in the stands from Auburn, they knew it was coming too. It wasn't like they were elated and they knew they were going to win. They were going to say, and I'm going to say it, they were saying, oh shit, here it comes and it's going to happen. And it did.
I'm amazed at that. I tell people prevent defense prevents you from winning the game. And Kevin, you said it earlier. They were playing not to win, but they were playing to lose. Now, the most impactful rivalry or game of rivalry Saturday was in Bedlam, Stillwater, Oklahoma, a very strange place. Oklahoma State Cowboys beat the Oklahoma Sooners. And if OU losing the game wasn't enough, Luke, less than 24 hours later, Lincoln Riley, of the product of Muleshoe, Texas, announces he is going to USC to coach the Trojans. First off, if Oklahoma wins that game and they go into the Big 12 championship game this weekend, does Lincoln Riley take that USC? Does he announce the next day he's taking that USC job?
I think so. I think he was out regardless. I think that there was misdirection. There was a lot of other conversation about possible LSU and all that. But you notice how USC has been real quiet, right? Prior to that, they've been real quiet. Not much discussion around their coaching search. I think that this was something in the works for a while. I think that, Lincoln Riley was not pleased with the decision for Oklahoma to go to the SEC. I think he saw the writing on the wall that they were not going to be an elite team in the SEC and that he would have to battle every single game. And not to put down the Big 12, but I mean, it's much different than the SEC. Yeah. And so I think ultimately, he could go to USC where, he's out there on the West Coast. He's not having to worry about slogging it out in the SEC so that his star status, he can continue to rise and continue to be that star as opposed to just being one of another group of coaches, another team in the SEC getting smacked around every weekend.
Kevin, let me ask you this. You put on your AD hat for a minute. If you were involved with discussions, if you were the AD at Oklahoma, y'all are involved with discussions about going to the SEC, do you run it by your football coach who manages literally the greatest asset at the university, or is that a decision made above his head and you more or less inform him as opposed to getting his opinion?
Well, I've had experience going from the ACC to the Big Ten, and yes, definitely I involved many of my coaches and got their thoughts. Now, many of them had a difficult time embracing moving from one conference to another, but I included them so they at least felt part of the process. Now I don't know what happened in Oklahoma, don't know what happened in Texas, but if you don't include those folks that are on your team and you say you value them as a team member and as a coach, then these kind of things happen. Now I'm not saying that he made a decision because they're going to the SEC. But I think if you listen to everybody's opinion and you look at how and what he did, I think that has something to do with it. The other thing is, I'm going to go back to what both y'all were saying, is that I believe him going to USC and being in the Pac-12, that he has an easier course to go and win the college football championship. And the other thing is, he's already demonstrated he can recruit. And I mean, it's fertile ground in Los Angeles. All he has to really do, if he can just shut down Los Angeles and keep those kids, and then he could go out and cherry pick throughout the country, he'll be back where Pete Carroll was. I mean, that's a prime example of that. So, I'll tell you who is probably concerned and a little bit worried now is our friends over at UCLA. I mean, I can't tell you how the accolades that the AD from USC is getting. And if you look at the LA Times and those papers down there and everybody on the newscast, and they're worshiping the AD at USC. I mean, he pulled off a coup because everybody was speculating all those other names, and then he pulls this out of his hat. Hats off to Mike Bone.
Let me say this about Mike Bone. Many of you know that I direct the Black Student Athlete Summit, founder of that 3-day summit every year in January. Last year when we were virtual, Luke, USC registered 32 staff members for the summit. That was Mike Bone doing that, So, that kind of commitment, to understanding what the Black issues are, I'm happy that, he pulled off a coup and got Lincoln Riley. Luke, how do you respond to the people primarily in Trump country who say, why would he leave Oklahoma and go to Los Angeles? How do you respond to people like that who talk about Oklahoma's just as good of a program?
So ultimately, I tell them, like, listen, stop being a fan, right? Put your business hat on. I mean, seriously, look at the numbers. Look what this guy's getting paid. He's getting paid an incredible amount of money, an incredible contract, and he's able to go and be at a school that is, again, like we've been saying, he's going to be able to just potentially dominate in the Pac-12.
Right.
And instead of becoming a relative unknown in the SEC. So listen, people in Oklahoma and beyond who are Oklahoma fans, it is no question. A USC opportunity is a much better opportunity than an Oklahoma opportunity, especially when Oklahoma is headed to the SEC. It's a no-brainer. It's a business decision for himself and his family. But here's the thing. Coaches make business decisions for themselves all the time. Let's make sure that we're not forgetting and then casting dispersions when student athletes decide that they want to make business decisions for their own benefit. Let's make sure we give them that same latitude as well.
Kevin, one of the critiques of Lincoln Riley is that he's never built the program before. It was basically, Bob Stoops built this program up. So they basically said, he was handed a Ferrari, basically. Do you think he knows how to build a program? Because I think that is a legitimate question. Can you build a program?
Well, Doc, I'll say USC is a Ferrari, but some of the parts have been broken or, he has to replace them, but he's going into something that's pretty solid. I want to go back to, what Luke was saying and Doc, what you're all about. If you look at USC too, academically compared to Oklahoma, I mean, there's no comparison. There was just a report that came out, the 10 top schools that have created billionaires. USC is in that. I don't think Oklahoma is. Right. So here's the deal, though. So not only did he get a lucrative contract, but they bought him a $6 million house, and he and his family have access to a private jet 24/7. So, I mean, you look at all that, and I mean, if I'm him, and if I have to make a decision on what's best for me and my family, and that's what this is now. This ain't about team. This is about I now. It's with the student athlete. It's with the coaches. If we believe that now everything is dictated and we're thinking about team, I mean, that's long gone. And Doc, you and I have had this conversation and, about paying athletes and everything else. And, at one point I was saying that, I thought that what they were getting was sufficient. Well, I apologize to you because this last week has demonstrated that I am totally wrong now and that everybody deserves to be paid.
Getting paid. Let's go to Brian Kelly, Luke. Left Notre Dame, which is considered, the pinnacle for some people. And he goes to LSU. Is that a good fit?
Business decision. It doesn't matter if it's a good fit, because guess what? He could suck at recruiting. He could be awful in his first 2 or 3 years. And guess what? He's going to get paid that whole contract. And so business decision, was it smart for him? Personally, absolutely. Is it a better institution? I mean, I don't see that. I will say this, I think that what he's walking into is a team that's already been built that can go out and that can win. And I think he absolutely can help with that. But in terms of like the institutions, you got Notre Dame. I mean, you're talking about like Notre Dame is an institution among institutions. So to go to LSU, it was a business decision for him. And we can get into the conversation about how he did it and all that.
Right. But a football decision too, Luke. I mean, he can get anybody in school to LSU. As long as you got a diploma, you can get an LSU. You know what I mean? So I think from that regard, he won't have to be making these deals with the director of admissions at Notre Dame about how many slots he could have and so forth and so on. Now, what about this idea, Kevin, of coaches quitting before the season is over? And what upsets me is that when some of these young men say, I'm not going to play in the bowl game, because I'm getting ready for the draft, they are labeled quitters. They are labeled soft. But I hear very little criticism of these coaches who were leaving. I mean, Oklahoma has a game Saturday. No, they don't. But I'm saying Notre Dame potentially go to the college football playoff. And what the college football playoff committee said the other day was that coaching changes and personnel changes can impact, how they rank people. So if you got a star quarterback that gets hurt last week of the season, Luke, or if a big-time coach like Kelly won't be coaching a team, that will impact the committee and how they vote for the top 4. So what about this issue, Kevin, of coaches quitting, or are you surprised?
So first I want to go back a little bit about LSU, because if you look at the last 3 coaches they have brought in there, they've won national championships. So he sees it's a much easier road to get there than any place else. I mean, it's hypocritical. I have sat down in room after room with coaches, and they talk about being committed to the team, right. Watching out and taking care of your teammates. This is about us, and the whole thing. Where, if you have to take the E out of team now and put I in there. And, this is, it's just selfish. But that's the world we live in now in college athletics. So here's what we have to determine, and I think it's already been. Is this about academics or is this about entertainment? And this is about entertainment. There's no question about it now. I mean, how could you go into somebody's house with their parents and the kid and say, we're a family, we're together in this, we're going to make sure that your son is taken care of, and then you up and leave. And like you said, Oklahoma is going to go play in a good bowl game. Right. Notre Dame still had a chance to play for the national championship. So, if Coach Kelly came into my house and talked to my son, now it was like, don't use that family stuff for me. It's just about how are you going to provide for my son and make sure that he's going to have the kind of livelihood that you have. That's what I want to ask now. And, I told you a long time ago, one of the fathers came up to me and asked me how I was going to brand his son. And I looked at him like he was crazy. But now, I'm going to ask the same question. How are you going to put money in his pocket now and in the future? And so that's where we're going. What it's going to be is Saturday is going to be Sunday now. It's professional and it's entertainment. And here's the other thing that we have to talk about. These coaches making all this money. So now you've got James Franklin and my guy at Michigan State in the same division, in the same conference. So somebody is not going to win. And so paying $100 million over 10 years, somebody's not going to get the return on their asset.
Right, Luke, Mel Tucker set the market, right? $9.5 million. I think Lincoln Riley may be getting 11. Brian Kelly, the same range. James Franklin. Neither one of those coaches has a ring. Mel Tucker had one good year as coach at Michigan State. So the question is, if those 4 coaches getting roughly $10 million, what's Saban going to get? What's Ryan Day going to get? What's Dabo Swinney going to get? And hasn't the market been completely reset, Luke?
the market has been exploded, right? I mean, this is I mean, it's just completely exploded. What we've seen happen over this last couple weeks in college football head coach salaries, it is unreal. And that's why, you know, to Kevin's point too, I agree. At this point, don't say anything about student athletes having the opportunities, you know, to make money, student athletes being able to brand themselves and make business decisions. Don't ever talk about a player who says, I want to make a business decision for myself and not play in this bowl game because I want to make sure that I'm ready for the NFL draft coming up so I can put money in my pockets. Don't ever say any of that, because this free market has exploded, right? And when you think about it, let's talk about where we're at, right? We're talking about, you know, nonprofit organizations, i.e. schools and institutions, right, who bring in this money, and donors contribute this money and they get their tax benefits for contributing to a nonprofit, right? And, oh, by the way, you don't pay for labor, right? So we have to then put this money somewhere else. I mean, this whole thing is blown up. And I think we're headed to something completely different. I think, you know, when Kevin talks about, you know, Sundays being played on Saturdays, I think we're getting there, except for the one thing that's the difference is the student athlete concept.
Kevin, where's all this money coming from? I mean, LSU, the library is dilapidated. Faculty members had to take significant pay cuts. At Michigan State, the faculty are in revolt now because they had to take 3 to 5% pay cuts during COVID. And they like, we want our money. So where's all this money coming from?
Well, Doc, if we look at going through the COVID situation last year, and you look at the stock market, and you look how well it did, well, those people, let's go back to what I said earlier, and we look at those top 10 schools with a number of billionaires that, I mean, you have those people that have that kind of discretionary income, that love the school, and that is willing to do anything to win. And so they'll write a check. But here's the thing that we've talked about before in this show, that everybody was crying broke because of COVID, and that they were running deficits. Well, okay, like you said, where is this money coming from? And so now you're still running a deficit, but you're paying a buyout, and then you're paying a coach $10 million, buying him a $6 million house, giving him a free jet. I mean, it's ridiculous. But this is where we are now, and there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. You know,
and Kevin, you brought up this issue Kevin, you brought this issue of dead money before. Explain to our viewers what dead money is.
So dead money is all these buyouts. So from 2010 to 2021, $533 million has been paid in buyouts. And so what that means is that you fired a coach, he's not working, and you're still paying him millions and millions of dollars. I think the average, there was 116 coaches, 116 coaches making $1 million or more and not working and coaching at those institutions. I mean, if we look at it, well, here's the thing that was mind-boggling, that of this buyout money, almost $6 million was going to strength and conditioning coaches.
Kevin, you got to be kidding me, man.
We're not even talking about the head coaches. And so the other thing people don't realize, so when you buy out these coaches and you have to pay them a significant amount of money, I think, Leonard, you know, at Texas, they had to pay Coach Herman, $24 million?
Yeah, a lot, yeah.
Then they had to pay his staff off, but then you bring Sarkisian in, and he's making, and his staff's making $37 million. So now we're not only talking about $24 million, but we're adding that. So we're over $50 million just in that. And as you said, you go around the university now, people will not give money the way for the library as they will for intercollegiate athletics and for football and basketball. So, it's a societal problem. When we look at this, it's beyond this. And, we talked, fans are fanatics. Well, we've gone beyond being fanatical. I mean, this is just crazy. But, I'm curious when this whole model changes, like Luke, we talked about, and Sunday becomes Saturday. how are people going to think about this? Because it's not about the school anymore. It's not about wearing that burnt orange or whatever, the black and gold of Wake Forest. It's beyond that now. Now you're rooting for individuals, and it's not about the team. And so here's the thing, though. With this NIL and with these coaches getting paid this kind of money, the pressure of winning is much more now. So you think that there was cheating going on in the past.
Right.
Well, just wait to the future, because now you're really under pressure because you're making all this money and you've got to win. You have to win.
Luke, if I'm getting $9.5 million a year and I want that recruit out of Houston, Dallas, or Seattle, hell, I could give the kid $1 million out of my pocket. I could go arrange the NIL deal. You know what I mean? So, Luke, I think, man, Luke, you may need to change your business model and go start representing coaches. You know, because Jimmy Sexton is killing it in terms of coach representation. So, Luke, where are we at with all this money? And I asked Kevin, where does the money come from? And, you know, and any good CFO will tell you that athletic departments practice voodoo economics when it comes to trying to determine how much money they've made. You know, and so Luke, where are we at? Where's all this stuff going in terms of the big business nature of college football?
Well, here's the thing, because I got to go back to what Kevin was saying. The hypocrisy is unreal, right? I'm in this business where I talk to, universities all across the country about name, image, and likeness, like you brought up. And we've had many schools that have talked about budgetary constraints, right, for student athlete development, for practical real world education, and bringing in folks like us to educate and prepare their student athletes. And then you see what we've seen over the past few weeks. It is beyond fanatical. I mean, this business of college sports is just that. And what we haven't talked about is this whole idea of the college football playoff. We've talked about it in the past. If they expand right now, their revenue is $600 million, right, for the college football playoff per year. If they expand to 12 teams, we're talking about $2.2 billion a year. March Madness is $1 billion a year and funds the NCAA. And now you're talking about football alone, potentially in just a few years, producing $2.2 billion. And we're going to continue to see these numbers increase because we're going to continue to see bigger and bigger media deals. Look across all sports, right? The media deals, the NBA, the NFL, college sports, we're going to continue to see money there as well. But I think, one of the things that we have to remember, though, is we have got to not forget the student athlete. And we always put the student athlete behind and put them down, that they're fighting for rights and they want too much and all this kind of stuff. But when we look at the business, come on, man, this is a big business that is being controlled by, the institutions. And we've seen the NCAA. We've seen the Supreme Court put a major crack in the foundation of the NCAA. But we have to make sure that no matter what the changes are, that we end up making sure that the student athletes aren't forgotten about.
And Luke, I'll be more specific. We got to realize this is an industry completely built on the backs of black boys. They're not men, they are boys. The entire industry. I'm working on a book called, The Ghosts of Bear Bryant, racing college football. And so this year I went to about 5 or 6 games, Ohio State, Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, A&M, Mississippi State, and I went to a TCU, West Virginia game. And I'll do it over the course of 2 years. You got nothing but black players on the field, right? There are no black people in the stands. Yes. There is one little black section at every game I go to, and it's the recruits and it's the family members of the players. These stadiums are nothing but Trump rallies. That's what they are. There are no black people there. But you know
what that does?
What, Luke?
But what that does, though, is that leads to what we're talking about here, too. Where are the black coaches, right? Like, if we think about now when we're starting to talk about these, this situation where we've got openings with, Notre Dame right now. We've seen these openings, these movements and things like that. Where are the black coaches being talked about in this process?
They aren't. How can you talk about Bill O'Brien but not talk about Eric Bieniemy? Or not talk about Byron Leftwich? You know what I mean? And so you don't hear any black coaches being mentioned, other than they say the brother at Notre Dame they may just promote him to be head coach. Kevin, are you shocked that black coaches aren't even being mentioned for the Oklahoma opening, for the Notre Dame opening, and then whoever fills those two jobs, it'll be a domino effect of other openings. Do you see black coaches capitalizing on this present-day coaching carousel?
So, Doc, we talk about the NCAA was talking about diversity and inclusion and, coming up with a formula. How do we get more black folks involved in this? Well, in the past, at least you had some black folks on a list and they talked about it. But I mean, present day, they are not even concerned about mentioning any names. They're not bringing up, this person or that person. I mean, they don't care. That's how I see it, because if they cared, there's been opportunities to fix this and they haven't. So here's what we're looking at. The NCAA now has showed that it's invalid with everything that's happening. And what I see happening is, and people don't want to talk about this, they hide when you start bringing it up, but the Power Five eventually is going to separate, because
Absolutely.
We're looking at billion-dollar industries in these universities. These universities are billion-dollar organizations. And so now we're looking at, if I'm in the Power Five and that I'm going to make all that money, Luke said, with increasing the championship. Here's the other thing, and it's been talked about before. The Final Four, you could have the 65 teams in the Power Five compete in the Final Four and have it, and it's not going to lose any enthusiasm that it has been in the past, because you do have some of those Cinderella teams, but folks it don't matter to folks.
Right.
Here's the other thing. These coaches have been talking about the transfer portal and everything else. Well, if you look at the success of these programs now, it's coming from the transfer portal. And now these kids, there's no alliance, even with the kids now. It's like, I'm going to start, look at Wake Forest. They lost that running back and went to Michigan State. I mean, so now it's definitely going to be, how am I going to benefit from this? And so there is no team anymore. It's all about me.
Luke, what I see black coaches doing, I don't know if y'all saw on Twitter last night or this morning, apparently the defensive back coach, who currently now is being employed by Oklahoma, was out recruiting with Bob Stoops the other night, but he was also recruiting for UA on behalf of USC. I mean, and so how do black coaches get themselves caught up in nonsense like this? And I think it got discovered because a recruit tweeted it out that I just talked to so-and-so or so-and-so, reached out to me. And so, Luke, how do you have a situation where black coaches, all they're primarily doing is all lateral moves for the most part. They're being used basically like inner city recruiters. They get a bogus title called assistant head coach, which is supposed to fool people. How do they get caught up in nonsense like this? Because this brother's reputation has been tarnished, and he may be fired from Oklahoma, and he may not get hired at SC.
Yeah, it's exactly what you said. They're being used. I mean, they're being used to go out basically as salespeople, to go out and sell a product, to get an asset to come to that product. I mean, that's really all it is. And I got to go back to this, because the black coach piece is, I think, important. And Doc, I'm going to throw it back to you on this. Do you think that, you talked about it earlier, right? You talked about the amount of white fans in the stands, right? Mm-hmm. So the question then is, do you think that some of those schools want a black coach? Do you think that the fans, as we know, fans, boosters that are supporting the institutions, are they ready? Do they want a black coach?
No, and in the South, let me tell you why. Because in the South, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, the head football coach sits at the top of the food chain, right? All the donors want to be with that coach, all the big-time alums, all the leaders of business and industry, the governor. So if Luke Fetlem becomes the head coach of Texas or Mississippi State or LSU, guess what, Luke? You're going to have a crew of brothers that you're going to be tight with. And so what that means is that all these other movers and shakers, they not in the clique anymore because you don't need them. And so I tell people it's bigger than the X's and O's. And in the South, understand that every football weekend is that occupies their social calendar, right? From literally Labor Day all through January, everything revolves around college football. And I think it just changes the dynamic when you have a black coach. All right. So we'll see what happens to these openings. Hopefully these brothers can get their names mentioned, but it doesn't look like it so far. Moving on. Nobody ever talks about how Kevin, when coaches leave or coaches get fired, the impact that has on the current student athletes that are part of that program. Kevin, how does it impact students when coaches leave?
So first of all, I want to go back to what Luke was saying, and I disagree about using these coaches. They're getting paid $250,000, $500,000. So I mean, they know what they're in, and so they've signed up for that. And many of them are selling out. And they'll tell these kids one thing, and they'll be, I'm gonna be there for you, brother, and everything else. At the end of the day, they will sacrifice everything at the expense of these kids. So I don't want to hear that they're being used, because that is totally not true. They know what they're into, and they accept it. They accept it because you have choices in life. But that, and it goes back to the money again. I mean, we all got to take care of our family, and I'm good with that. But at least be honest with yourself that you're doing this.
Luke, how do you respond? Okay, I'm sorry. Let Luke respond, because he says they're not getting used. Sure. Go ahead, Luke.
Listen, at the end of the day, and I'm not going to say selling out, right? They're going to do whatever they decide to do, right? They're making professional decisions. I get that. But at the end of the day, the institution is bringing them in for that specific purpose, right? The specific purpose is we want to make sure that we've got somebody that can go to the inner city and sit down with a family and encourage them and ultimately sell them on getting their son to our program and our institution. So from my perspective, they're putting in who they feel like is the best person to do that. And typically it's black and brown coaches that are going out to have these conversations in the inner cities. Are they getting paid for it? Yes, absolutely. They're getting paid for it. But are they being used for their particular purpose or their particular skill to be able to do that? Absolutely.
But Luke, you're telling me that they don't know this, that they're coming into these jobs and they have no idea that this is what they're there and that's what it's all about. That's what you're telling me.
I'm not telling you that they don't know this. They know what it is, right? They understand the assignment, right? That's what the young people say right now, right? Like, I understood the assignment. They understand the assignment. They know what they have to do and what they're being asked to do. But let's be clear though. Like, the institution is using them for a purpose. They may know it. I mean, they may know what they're getting into, but they're being used for that. Right? I mean,
let me say this.
Because here's the thing. Here's the thing. But they're not being.
So if they know that and they're good with that, then because they have other options, they could go out and find another job and not be part of that. So they're pimping the system just like everybody else is. So I mean,
but
they've got to take some responsibility for this.
But
I agree with that. But here's the difference.
Let me say this.
They're not being.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say they're not becoming the head coaches. Right. And that's, to me, the difference. They're not then getting set up to be the head coaches. They're being kept in this category. I'm going to keep you in this box. You're going to accept me in this box.
Luke, they're not even becoming coordinators.
Thank you.
They running back coaches, wide out coaches, DB coaches, and D-line coaches, and they'll stay in those roles 25 years. Now, Kevin, I will say this. I'm going to defend Luke for a minute. A lot of these black coaches have bought into this idea that we are saving these young men, that if it wasn't for sports, they'd be dead or in jail. So a lot of them really think that they are creating these amazing opportunities. My biggest disappointment for black coaches, and when I realized as a group, some of the weakest black men in America, I would argue, stand on the sidelines on Saturday afternoon in football games. A few years ago, I was invited to American Football Coach Association conference in Nashville to speak. There is a black group there that meets inside the larger white organization. I get there Sunday afternoon. Me and my boys go. I'm excited. The black event now was Sunday night, Luke. I walk into, I guess, the Grand Ole Opry or something like that, big hotel. Brothers wouldn't even speak to me. They beat me like two brothers with a bunch of white coats. They wouldn't even speak to me. I would go up to brothers, hey, man, y'all coming to the black event tonight at 7 o'clock? dudes looked at me like, oh, no, I'm good on that. When the event started, it may have been 30 coaches in there. It ended up with about 180. And I just said, y'all some of the weakest black men I have ever seen in my life, because Luke and Kevin, they have all this bravado when it's in an all-black environment. All this bravado, all this hyper-masculinity. But when they were around those white coaches and those white colleagues, it was as if they had been completely neutered. And that's when I knew that we're advocating for those guys to get jobs. Sometimes they can be worse than the white head coach. I'm sorry, I'm on my rant. Go ahead, Kevin.
Hey, Leonard, you've been with me and you've witnessed this, that it's not only the black coaches, it's most black people involved in college athletics.
Come on, man.
You and I have been in rooms where it's been nothing but black folk, and boy, do we talk a lot of stuff, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And then you've been with me. Once we get out of that room and we get in the room with the white folks and everybody else, what happens? Nobody says anything. I mean, you and I witnessed that when we went to that conference, and you let them know what the real was.
Right.
And that room was petrified. But there were only a couple folks, and they were white folks too, that realized what you were saying was the truth, and they invited you back. And that was the only time they invited a speaker back to address people, and the room was full all the time. But here's the thing. Once they left that room, they didn't really want to acknowledge what you said because it was the truth. And if they had to apply everything that you said and did, that would have been making a big difference. And, I'll just be honest. I am not where I was a couple years ago because you and I have made ourselves vulnerable for doing the right thing and sticking up for the right people. And you and I could both say we could look around and we were awful lonely, and we were out there by ourselves for a long time. And it was basically just me and you.
That's right. Absolutely. Come on, you preaching out, brother. That's right. Luke, what's your take on that, on me and Kevin's perspective? Are we being too hard on these folks, Luke?
I don't know. I mean, you all are dealing with that experience every single day, right? You get to be in the institutions and be involved and engaged to be able to talk about it from your perspective. So I honor that and respect it. What I would say, though, is, along this line of what we're talking about and this idea of, black coaches and going out and doing the recruiting and all that kind of stuff, let's also not forget what we have right now with the transfer portal, right? And this whole idea now that it's not just about going out to recruit, but because of the transfer portal and the fact that student athletes now can simply, enter the transfer portal and transfer and not have to sit out, now you've got coaches who have to be able to make sure that they're recruiting to retain their existing players. So that's why it's so important for these coaches that we're talking about to, be able to have that ability of building relationship to be able to keep the student athletes that they have.
Luke, you know what I told
Hey, Doc, here's the thing. Now, we're talking about the kids. They know who's real and who's phony. Right. So now when we bring these guys in too, so that makes it even more difficult and it makes it more challenging because they'll sit in a room and once the coach leaves, they'll say, come on, man, we ain't going for that. So, I mean, and these kids know. And so, the ones that love them, that are there for the right purpose, they'll trust them. And these coaches could really be impactful. But there's a lot of coaches that they know it doesn't matter what color they are. If they're fake, then it doesn't do anybody any good.
Hey, if I was a big time college football player, SEC, Big Ten, something like that, I would get in the portal every single year. I would put my services on the open market every single year. And I think, and let me ask you this is a cultural question. Why do we tend to, Luke, have loyalty? Why do we as black folk tend to be loyal to institutions and people that aren't loyal to us?
You asking a question that we could spend a whole another 5 hours talking about.
Right.
I think it's deep-seated. I think that there are a lot of reasons why we have a loyalty to institutions. I mean, that is just something where I think is deep seated, where we could go back generations and generations. And the idea of acceptance of an institution, acceptance, right? It plays a lot in our psyche to be able to say we've made it, or we're good now, right? We've accomplished and we've come up. So I think from that perspective, I think there are a lot of reasons why. But let's be very clear. To your point, this idea of possibly entering a transfer portal every single year, it scares people because it thinks that it creates this notion of college student athlete free agency.
Right.
And that scares the crap out of a lot of people, because that then goes to, again, yet another opportunity for student athletes to have a piece of power, right, in this whole equation that is built on their backs. And we don't want them to have any power. So this idea that now all of a sudden, oh, I'm going to enter the transfer portal and I'm going to see who's going to be the top bidder for me. Because guess what? Name, image, and likeness now. We know that coaches aren't supposed to be using that to say, hey, I got you these deals. But we know that there's been cheating in college sports prior to name, image, and likeness. We know that it will continue on. And not that says that we condone that, but rather it says we know that student athletes will have opportunities in different institutions and different locations based on who they are, their celebrity ability, their physical ability, etc. So I do think that I think we're going to start to see more student athletes entering the transfer portal to quote unquote test the waters and see what's out there. And I think that that's just fine for student athletes, because we've seen coaches are doing it all the time.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Kevin, take on the portal. Would you encourage student athletes to get in the portal every year? The ones that got the juice and the leverage to do it.
Well, absolutely. But here's the thing. You've got coaches now that are telling them to do that, because their bread and butter now is not going out and recruiting the high school athlete. It's being able to recruit that portal, because now you have film. Now you know who can and who cannot play at this level. So my question is, what happens to a lot of these high school athletes that are what we call them, 3-star and, borderline 4-star, because they're going to be left out. And they're going to have different, they're not going to have the choices and opportunities they once had. So, now here's what we're looking at. So now we have a bigger pool that are going to have to go and play community college or do other things because they're not coming, they're not going to come in as freshmen. And so now this has changed the whole dynamic. Yeah. Luke, I want to go back to what you were saying, though. These student athletes, athletes know they do have power now. And it's just going to continue to grow. And so now here's the thing. We're not going to have to, look at labor unions and everything else bringing these kids in, because they're smart enough and they've been exposed enough where they're going to create their own organizations. Might not be unions, but they're going to know that they have the power and the opportunity. And this whole thing's going to change and it's going to blow up. And people are going to say, well, now what do we do?
Right.
So it's more complex than we ever see before. Right. And with all this money coming in, I mean, it's just going to be more challenging. It's not going to be what it has been. And so now if we don't grasp and we don't look at the future and we don't know how, if we don't start dealing with it, I mean, this whole thing is going to implode on these universities.
Right. And I predict, and I've been saying this for 2 years, the Power Five won't break away. It'll be the top 32 college football teams that are going to break away. The days of Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, no offense, Luke, Wake Forest, North Carolina, Arizona State, the days of them eating off of the big programs, those days over. So what I predict, and hopefully I'll have something on this online in about a week or so, is that you'll have the top 32 teams break away, and then they will come up with the model to play the athlete. Because check this out. It doesn't make sense. It makes no sense at all for USC to be playing Arizona State, Oregon State. Why? Take half of those teams in the Pac-12, the top 6, put them with the top 6 in the Big Ten, top 6 in other programs, and you're going to have 32 teams just like in the NFL, and the TV contract will be enormous. And I'm hoping that if they go to a model like that, we can come up with a fair compensation model. And I've been talking about a 51-49 revenue split, right? The university get 51%, the ball players get 49%. People say I'm crazy, but I believe that somewhere, somehow, it will happen, because otherwise the current model is not sustainable. All
Hey,
right,
but
y'all.
Doc, let's go into this further
Go
because
ahead.
football and basketball is paying for all those other sports. So
Absolutely.
now what happens to that? So if we start losing the Olympic sports, that feeds our Olympic team. And our government right now is not going to pay like these other countries and have these, Olympic organizations and fund the Olympic teams. So, there's something to think about because we embrace the Olympic and Olympic
Right.
Games. And so now if you look at the athletes that participate, particularly for our country, but the foreign countries too, where they're getting their training and all their experience is from intercollegiate athletics. So it's much larger than that, and it's much more dynamic. So, I don't know if people are thinking about that, but they need to.
Right. All right, final, as we approach the end of today's show, again, this is Fourth and Just Us, where we offer a fresh perspective on the intersection of race, sports, and politics. And we've had an exciting show today talking about, this amazing week in college football. And it's not over, right? I would expect some more reverberations throughout the college football world throughout the rest of the week. Now we'll go to our final thoughts period. And Luke, we'll go to you first for your final thoughts.
Absolutely. Two final thoughts real quick. Number one, we have got to change the overtime rules in college football. It is ridiculous that we just start going for 2-point conversions after the third overtime. It is ridiculous and it's an embarrassment. It needs to stop. My second final thought. Here's to Wake Forest, because we will be playing in the ACC championship this weekend. And I will tell you this, I loved my time at Wake Forest. The motto of Wake Forest is pro humanitate, for the good of humanity. It has shaped me in terms of the work that I do in my communities and in my profession. So, I know we always joke around about it, but I have loved my experience at Wake Forest. I love being a part of the alumni community there. And I wish my Deacons all the best this weekend. Go Deeks.
Now, what will the game be played at, Luke?
You said where? It's in Charlotte.
Yeah. Oh, Charlotte. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right, Kevin Anderson, your final thoughts for today's show.
So Luke, is it Ohio State or is it Wake Forest?
Well, listen, after Ohio State's win over Duke in basketball yesterday, that Ohio State basketball looking pretty strong, but I got to give love to my alma mater. Come on, Wake Forest. Let's go.
Well, hey, rest in peace, Lee Elder, the first black man to ever play in Augusta at the Masters. He's done so much for us, and it's always something to say that, the crown, heavy is the crown, because he was the first black man to really make an emphasis. Well, wasn't the first, but he was the one who was first recognized. And so, God bless him and his family.
Last night, me and several other Jackson State alumni hosted a dinner for the Jackson State women's basketball team. I want to thank Coach Tamika Reed. We booked out Olive Garden. I know that ain't big time for Kevin and Luke, but it's big time for us. And when they got off the bus and I saw those sisters walking to that restaurant with the Jackson State women's basketball gear on, I got emotional. You know what I mean? I love giving back to my alma mater. Coach Tamika Reed has won 3 straight SWAC championships. And I said, well, Coach, what has kept you at Jackson State? And she said something very similar to what Deion Sanders said. She said, Doc, this is my ministry. So we had a good time there for a few hours. And tonight they'll play the University of Texas Longhorns women's team basketball. So about 30 of us J-State folk will be in the house tonight. I love Jackson State University. Folks, thank you for joining us for this latest episode of Fourth and Just Us. Again, we offer a fresh perspective on race, sports, and politics. We look forward to seeing you same time, same place next week.